We're a little fancier this morning. Jim asked me to fill in for him this morning, and since it hasn't been that long since we did our study on names of the Messiah, I decided to return to that book. Not for another name of the Messiah, but rather to speak about the return of the Messiah. We will be in Zechariah chapter 14 this morning, so I would encourage you to turn there. Zechariah, second to last book in the Old Testament, if I'm not mistaken. Am I mistaken? Am I correct? Zechariah, Malachi, Matthew, right? Zechariah. Zechariah, Zechariah.
The priest of the New Testament. Zechariah is a book in the Old Testament.
Yeah, we'll find the book of Zechariah, okay?
Must be the Apocrypha.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the second to last book in the Old Testament. So if you find Matthew and turn back a few pages, you'll run right into Zechariah. Little history. In 586 BC, I think most of you know, Nebuchadnezzar conquered Jerusalem. Carried many of the people off into captivity. This act, many have viewed as the end of God's relationship with Israel. Some people still believe that today, that God has abandoned the nation of Israel and turned his attention to the church, and the church has replaced the nation of Israel. Zechariah would beg to differ with you this morning from the pages of his book. But the argument says that God has turned his back on his covenant with Abraham and with David. Covenant with Abraham is what? What was God's covenant with Abraham? That he would do what? He would make of him a great nation, give him the land, that from him would be descended the Messiah. The Davidic covenant, the promise that what would happen with David or from David.
Savior, ruler, king, millennial kingdom.
That there would forever be on the throne of David a king for all of eternity. The Davidic covenant. And if you're not familiar, which it scares me that some of you don't seem to be familiar with that, but we're going to go with that anyways. Both of those covenants are unconditional. Meaning, God, having made the covenant, will fulfill it. No ifs, ands, or buts. No matter what Abraham did, no matter what David did, no matter what their descendants did, God would be faithful to those covenants. And so the argument that says that God has turned his back on the nation of Israel just doesn't work. There's nowhere in Scripture that gives any indication that God is turning his back on his covenants, on his word. Zechariah's message here to Israel and to us is simple. One, God is still at work in the nation. And two, God is faithful to his word. It's that simple. God's not done with Israel. God's not turning his back on his word. I am the Lord. I change not. Now, question. This one I'm pretty sure you can get. What has man been doing since the fall of Genesis chapter 3? What has man been doing since the fall of Genesis chapter 3? Sinning. Getting better at it, too. Getting real good at it, seemingly. Man, since Genesis chapter 3, having now been taken on the sin nature, has just been steadily going downhill. You see it in the nation of Israel. You see it in the world today. We're not getting better. The claim in the 20th century was that man was getting better and better, and then you look at the 20th century and see, yeah, not so much. And the 21st century hasn't really improved that much on it. We've managed to avoid a complete world war to this point, but I don't know if we'll make the end of the century without it. But one thing I'm sure of is that I'm not making the end of the century either, so. Some of you have a shot at it. I'm not one of them. Quite simply, if God's plans are dependent on man's faithfulness, what would become of God? What would have become of God's plans by now? Yeah, they would have failed and failed miserably. So how does the Lord intend to stop this perpetual moral, spiritual slide? How does the Lord intend to stop this perpetual moral, spiritual slide? Simple. Remain faithful to His word. Stick to the plan in spite of the nation and our failures. Zechariah in chapter 14 lays out a part of that plan. Zechariah chapter 14, first 11 verses. Behold, a day is coming for the Lord, or the day of the Lord is coming, when the spoil taken from you will be divided in your midst. For I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city shall be taken, and the houses plundered, and the women raped. Half of the city shall go out into exile, but the rest of the people shall not be cut off from the city. Then the Lord will go out and fight against those nations, as when He fights on the day of battle. On that day His feet shall stand on the Mount of Olives that lies before Jerusalem on the east. And the Mount of Olives shall be split in two from the east to the west by a very wide valley, so that one half of the mount shall move northward and the other half southward. And you shall flee to the valley of my mountains, for the valley of the mountains shall reach to Azel. And you shall flee as you fled from the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah. Then the Lord my God will come, and all the holy ones with him. On that day there shall be no light, cold, or frost, and there shall be a unique day, which is known to the Lord, neither day nor night, but at evening time there shall be light. On that day living waters shall flow out from Jerusalem, half of them to the eastern sea and half of them to the western sea. It shall continue in summer as in winter. And the Lord will be king over all the earth. On that day the Lord will be one, and his name one. The whole land shall be turned into a plain from Geba to Rimmon, south of Jerusalem. But Jerusalem shall remain aloft on its site from the gate of Benjamin to the place of the former gate to the corner gate, and from the tower of Hananel to the king's wine presses. And it shall be inhabited, for there shall never again be a decree of utter destruction. Jerusalem shall dwell in security. This is a tremendous promise to a city and to a nation who has continually been oppressed and pressured on all sides. Beginning in verses 1 and 2, the attack on Jerusalem Behold, the day of the Lord comes, and thy spoil shall be divided in the midst of thee, for I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle. And the city shall be taken, and the houses rifled, and the women ravished. And half the city shall go forth in captivity, and the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city. Tell me what you notice, especially in those two verses. What do you see in those two verses that should grab your attention and go, I never noticed that? Really, that's what's going on there. There's one thing in those two verses. Remember who's at work here. Who is at work here? This is the easy question. Who's at work here? God is. The Lord, Yahweh. He is at work. And what does he say he's doing? Look at the beginning of verse 2. What does he say he is doing? I, the Lord, am bringing all these nations together against Israel. They think they're doing it. They think they're coming together to attack and destroy Israel. I am the one who is bringing them here. I wonder why he's doing that. The day of the Lord is a phrase used by several of the prophets. Many different contexts. Some are historical. Some of them have already happened. Some of them are in relation to end times, and that is exactly what's going on here. This day of the Lord is part of end time prophecy. Excuse me. This particular day of the Lord is in dealing with end time prophecy. Zechariah refers to that day in verses 4, 6, 8, and 9, and one day in verse 7. The purpose of this focus that Zechariah puts on that day is to draw attention to this end time judgment that's coming. It's a specific day. It is a day. It's going to be a remarkable day. Assuming you're a believer. It's going to be an awesome day. But it is a singular day yet to come in end time prophecy. The simple truth of the matter is, we already touched on, why does this attack against Jerusalem happen? Because God wants it to happen. The Lord, will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle. This happens because the Lord wants it to happen. No other reason. Not because the Arabs are finally going to get their way. Not because everybody hates the Jews. Not because they're trying to get Israel's money. Reportedly, and I'm not a geologist, so I don't know these things, but reportedly Israel has more oil underneath it than everybody else combined. I don't know that. Again, I'm not a geologist. What did the writer of Hebrews say? The love of money is the root of all evil. But none of that is what this is really about. What it is really about is the Lord bringing the nations together, quite simply so that he can defeat them. The city is divided. The houses are plundered. The women are raped. Half the city is carried off into captivity. It seems like there's a lot going on here, quickly. Like, but this is what's coming. All the nations, the world has turned against Israel. Even today, and Israel is certainly in the news, even today the entire world is not turned against Israel. A lot of it is, but not all of it. Zechariah's words here are pretty clear. The whole world is turned against Israel. I presume that includes the United States of America, if we're still a country then. I don't know whether we will be or not. I'd say I don't know if I'm going to be alive for that, but I know I'm going to be alive for that. I just don't know. I'm going to be with the Lord. I know the general gist of prophecy is that I'm going to be carried away in the rapture. We're all, as believers, going to be carried away in the rapture. There's going to be a tribulation. At the end of the tribulation, He's coming back to set up His millennial kingdom, to assume the throne of His father David. What it's going to look like, I don't know. I'm not that good. But Jerusalem is under attack by all the nations. They've been attacked, and you can look through the Old Testament and see they've been attacked by one nation, two nations, a conglomeration of nations. Still today, they're attacked by the Palestinians. They've been attacked multiple times by multiple nations in their current existence. Never all nations. Verses 3 through 5. There it is. Excuse me. Then the Lord will go out and fight against those nations as when He fights on a day of battle. Excuse me. Goodness. As when He fights on a day of battle. On that day, His feet shall stand on the Mount of Olives that lies before Jerusalem on the east. And the Mount of Olives shall be split in two from the east to west by a very wide valley, so that one half of the mountain shall move north, and the other half south. And you shall flee to the valley of my mountains, for the valley of the mountains shall reach to Azel, and you shall flee as you fled from the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah. Then the Lord my God will come, and all the holy ones with Him. Picture this. Jerusalem is under attack. There is violence everywhere in the city. Houses are plundered, women are raped. People are being driven not only from their home but from the city. And suddenly, there appears one descending, and it plants his feet on the Mount of Olives. And in so doing, he splits the mountain in half. Not just a little bit either. Significantly. Creating what the Bible calls a great valley that people will be able to pass through to escape Jerusalem. If you want to think of it that way, it's like an earthquake, but it's not an earthquake. I don't think it's an earthquake. I think it quite simply is the power of God. When He sets His feet on the Mount of Olives, it just creates an extraordinary, supernatural, geological event that divides the mountain in half. Think of it like the Israelites passing through the Red Sea. As on dry ground, it's recorded. They weren't walking through mud. They weren't having to step over fish. They walked across on dry ground. An easy path. I think the same thing will be true here. Because if you think of an earthquake, what's left behind in the wake of an earthquake? Destruction, damage, horrendously so. Rubble, rocks piled everywhere. I don't see that here. What I see is a path wide open, like this aisleway, except a lot bigger. People won't be having to fight to climb over the boulders that are left. There won't be concern about a collapse that will fall down on top of them. Remember who's doing this. This isn't what we consider a natural disaster. This is a supernatural event orchestrated by Almighty God. It serves a dual purpose. We'll get to that. From Moses through today, God has defended Israel, and he's back to do it again here in Zechariah chapter 14. If you want brief scriptural references, go to Joshua chapter 8, Joshua chapter 10, Joshua chapter 11, Judges chapter 3, 4, 5, and 7, and pretty much anywhere else in the Old Testament you want to look. And you will see God defending his people. I'm glad you enjoyed that. Current history, 1948, they were attacked. 1956, they were attacked. 1967, they were attacked. 1973, they were attacked. What happened every time? They were victorious. And quite honestly, they shouldn't have been. They had no business coming out victorious in any of those wars. And they did. Wasn't an accident. It wasn't because they were prepared. Certainly in 1948, they were not prepared. They were barely even a country. Having drawn in the nations, the Lord now engages in the battle. Sets his feet on the Mount of Olives, divides the mountain in half, creating this great valley for the people to pass through. Not only for the people to pass through, but as we'll see, water is going to pass through this valley as well. On to verses 6 through 11. On that day there shall be no light, cold, or frost, and there shall be a unique day, which is known to the Lord, neither day nor night, but at evening time there shall be light. On that day living waters shall flow out from Jerusalem, half of them to the eastern sea, half of them to the western sea. It shall continue in summer as in winter. And the Lord will be king over all the earth. On that day the Lord will be one, and his name one. The whole land shall be turned into a plain from Geba to Rimmon, south of Jerusalem. But Jerusalem shall remain aloft on its site from the gate of Benjamin to the place of the former gate, to the corner gate, and from the tower of Hananel to the king's wine presses. And it shall be inhabited, for there shall never again be a decree of utter destruction. Jerusalem shall dwell in safety. The renovation of Jerusalem. The light of the earth will be changed. I can't fathom this. Not at all. Why? Because every day I get up and the sun's up. Every day I go to bed, the sun's down. The next day, same thing. Sun comes up, the sun goes down. When the sun goes down, I see the moon, depending on what cycle it's in and whether or not there's clouds. It's a consistent thing. But Zechariah says in that day, it's going to change. I don't understand it completely. I wouldn't dare to try to explain it completely. I didn't see a good explanation of it. Good enough to convince me that they were right. Let me put it that way. But daylight and darkness are going to change. It makes it sound like the light is going to be like an evening light. But I don't know for sure. Again, not the expert on all these things. But the light of the earth is going to be changed. Look at verse 8. And it shall be in that day that living water shall go out from Jerusalem, half of them towards the former sea, or the eastern sea, and half of them towards the hinder sea, or the western sea. In summer and in winter it shall be. In other words, weather is going to have no effect on this water supply. If you look at the river right now, it's running high and it's running muddy because we've gotten a lot of rain. Go look at the river about mid-July. It'll probably be a lot clearer and there'll be a lot less of it because in all likelihood by the middle of July, it's going to be dry. Zechariah says not the case here. Any day, any month, doesn't matter. Day, night, the river is going to flow. It's going to flow consistently in two directions. To the east, to the west. What's to the west? Geography. What's to the west of Jerusalem, where the water's flowing? Please, somebody. Anybody. The Mediterranean Sea. And what does the Mediterranean Sea connect to? If you follow it westward, it runs into something much bigger. The Atlantic Ocean. And then from the Atlantic, it connects to all the other oceans of the world. Picture that. This river flows out of Jerusalem to the west, into the Mediterranean, drains into the Atlantic. From there, the Pacific, the Arctic, the Indian, all the way down around Antarctica. It's significant, and we'll get to that. But let's deal with it first flowing to the east. How does it flow to the east? Because there's this big mountain in the way. Oh, wait a minute. That mountain's split in half now. And there is a great valley dead center through that mountain. This river flows directly through that into what we know as the Dead Sea or the Salt Sea. And what does it do? It brings it to life. Turn with me to Ezekiel chapter 47. Excuse me. Then he brought me back to the door of the temple, and behold, water was issuing from below the threshold of the temple toward the east, for the temple faced east. The water was flowing down from below the south end of the threshold of the temple, south of the altar. Then he brought me out by way of the north gate and led me around on the outside to the outer gate that faces toward the east. And behold, the water was trickling out on the south side. Going eastward with a measuring line in his hand, the man measured 1,000 cubits, then led me through the water, and it was ankle deep. Again he measured 1,000 and led me through the water, and it was knee deep. Again he measured 1,000 and led me through the water, and it was waist deep. Again he measured 1,000, and it was a river that I could not pass through, for the water had risen. It was deep enough to swim in, a river that could not be passed through. And he said to me, Son of man, have you seen this? Then he led me back to the bank of the river. As I went back, I saw on the bank of the river very many trees on one side and on the other. And he said to me, this water flows toward the eastern region and goes down into the Araba, which is a desert, and enters the sea, which is the Dead Sea. When the water flows into the sea, the water will become fresh. It will no longer be a saltwater lake. It will no longer be dead. And wherever the river goes, every living creature that swarms will live. And there will be very many fish, for this water goes there, that the waters of the sea may become fresh. So everything will live where the river goes. This isn't just like the Kiski River. Not even close. Ezekiel says this water doesn't just flow from Jerusalem, it flows from out of the temple. And everywhere it goes, it changes things. So as it flows to the east, it changes the desert into farmland and pasture land until it drains into the Dead Sea. And the Dead Sea is no longer dead. Fish and all other sorts of wildlife now live in the Dead Sea. But the significance of it flowing to the west is it flows into the Mediterranean. From the Mediterranean to the Atlantic and around the world. This water flowing out from under the temple is going to have enormous life-giving properties that's going to affect the whole world. It's remarkable. And all of this displays the power of God. Unmistakably displays the power of God. But beyond that, it brings Jerusalem into focus, as the center of life on earth. This water flows from the temple, but remember, also in the temple is the Messiah. Sitting on the throne of his father David, reigning. Quickly back to Zechariah. I'm dwindling on my time. And the Lord will be king over all the earth. On that day the Lord will be one, and his name one. The whole land shall be turned into a plain, from Geba to Rimmon, south of Jerusalem. But Jerusalem shall remain aloft on its site, from the gate of Benjamin, from the gate of Benjamin to the place of the former gate, to the corner gate, and from the tower of Hananel to the king's wine presses. And it shall be inhabited. Recall back to a time when Nehemiah came back from captivity to help rebuild the city. People didn't want to live in the city. I believe it's in Nehemiah chapter 3. He had to order people to live in the city. Now people are going to want to live there. It shall be inhabited. For there shall never again be a decree of utter destruction. Jerusalem will dwell in security. The deserts are changed into fertile land. Jerusalem remains aloft, elevated. But not only elevated physically, but elevated in stature. Because the king will be there. Because the king will reign over all the world from his throne in Jerusalem. Sar Shalom. Anybody? Sar Shalom. What's shalom? Peace. What is one of the names that we give to Messiah? Sar Shalom, the Prince of Peace. The Prince of Peace reigning in Jerusalem. Jerusalem will dwell in security. And finally, once and for all, Jerusalem is secure and at peace. As a footnote, because I have a couple of minutes, look at verse 12, which is not necessarily part of the prophecy. I have to read it to you. I think it sounds better in ESV than it does in King James. They say the same thing. It's just a little more plain if you read it in the ESV. And this shall be the plague. Remember, this is, the nations have been brought together by God for this battle. And this shall be the plague with which the Lord will strike all the peoples that wage war against Jerusalem. Their flesh will rot while they are still standing on their feet. Their eyes will rot in their sockets, and their tongues will rot in their mouths. Just imagine you're one of these people who has come to do battle against Israel and to attack Jerusalem. And the king comes down and he sets his feet on the Mount of Olives and he divides it in half. And water begins to flow from the temple to the east and to the west, and it heals the nations. But everyone who has been involved in attacking Jerusalem will be standing there, and as they stand there, literally, they will rot as they stand. I think of it as the reverse of what happened to Ezekiel when he looked over the valley of dry bones, and their flesh came upon them and they came back to life. And this description is of people who, as they stand there alive, their flesh literally rots off of them, and they're left with nothing but bones. Not even skin and bones, just... My wife said it sounds like something you would see in a horror movie. But it's real. Why does anybody want to be on the wrong side of this? What could you hope to gain from being on the wrong side of this battle? And yet it will be a number that we can't even begin to imagine. Tens of hundreds of thousands, maybe millions, who come to wage war against Jerusalem. And when it's all over, the ones who are still alive will literally be standing there, and they will just rot right there. I think I'm going to stick with the king. That's all I have. Dave will be back next week.